The Government Communications and Information System on Wednesday hosted a webinar on localizing the implementation of the National Strategic Plan to end gender-based violence and femicide. The aim is to strengthen the fight against gender-based violence at local levels. The webinar was an opportunity to discuss and demonstrate just how the implementation of the plan to end gender-based violence through the 6 pillars directly impacts communities. For more on this, we are now joined by the director at Agape Youth Movement, Matsetsebale Tleane. Matsetsebale, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the agenda.
Good morning to you and your viewers.
What are some of the main takeaways from the webinar?
The main takeaways from the webinar is how various conveners and ambassadors of the 6 pillars of the National Strategic Plan, a collaborative, are working in various municipalities across the country to implement and fast-track the fight against GBV. So I think for me, that is the main takeaway, seeing how we as South Africans are collaboratively working based on the focal areas of our pillars of the NSP to deal with some of the issues that are really giving us problems with regard to GBV in our communities at a local level.
And in quest of dealing with some of these issues, I suppose there are some 6 pillars that will be implemented using the plan in order to end gender-based violence and femicide. Just what are some of these pillars?
These pillars are based on the pillars of the National Strategic Plan. We have the first pillar, which looks at accountability, coordination, and leadership. With the second pillar that looks at prevention and rebuilding of social cohesion. The third pillar looks at justice, safety, and protection. Fourthly, we have a pillar that looks at response, care, support, and healing. And on the 5th pillar, we're looking at economic power. And on the last and 6th pillar, we're looking at research and information management. All the 6 pillars are focusing on various ways through which we aim to tackle GBV, and we think that it's very effective to tackle GBV in this particular manner. I am the convener. I'm privileged to be the convener of Pillar 2, that is looking at prevention and rebuilding of social cohesion, that in essence looks at really turning the tide against socially accepted norms that perpetuate GBV in our society. So the second pillar that I'm convening is really looking at preventing. How do we implement evidence-based interventions and approaches that make GBV not to even find a place to happen in our communities and in our households?
I guess that is a question that is on everybody's minds and everybody's lips. I mean, how do we prevent gender-based violence? Because we know that a perpetrator of gender-based violence is not born, but self-made, as it were. So how then do we bring men and women and just about any potential perpetrator of gender-based violence?
I mean, as you're rightfully expressing, that none of us is born violent. Violence is something that we are really directly or indirectly taught through the environments in which we are brought up. And the basis of preventing violence, I think the most sustainable and effective way is to intervene way early, when we as young people or children are still at a very vulnerable character building phase. And it is at that point where we try to come up with interventions, either in schools and in their homes, through which they adapt very positive, gender roles and gender interpretations, so as to not find themselves in a situation where they are on the receiving end of GBV or they are the perpetrators of GBV. It really starts at the beginning, in our families, in our schools. For example, as Agape Youth Movement, a youth-led youth leadership organization working very closely with the Department of Basic Education and other partners such as UNICEF, we are implementing a series of national life skills programs that now, even with COVID, we had to digitize some of our programs, through which we teach young boys and girls in schools on how is it that they need to identify, traits of GBV, how is it that they don't practice it, and how is it that they call out their peers when they show signs of starting school-related GBV. So in essence, those are some of the ways in my field of work that we are trying to prevent GBV. I mean, in Pillar 2, we are also utilizing the media as a very powerful tool through which we challenge socially accepted norms of GBV, and also educating the society that we need to move from this patriarchal basis that is really making GBV to perpetuate.
You're quite right there, Matsetsebale. I mean, gender-based violence occurs as a result of normative role expectations and these unequal power relationships between genders in a society. So how then do we change this narrative, and perhaps could dismantling these patriarchal structures and these unequal power dynamics be the panacea or the solution for ending gender-based violence?
It takes all of us. I think the first point is for all of us to be intentional. I mean, if you look at the NSP on GBV collaborative, it is a multi-sectoral collaborative that brings together various stakeholders from government, civil society, private sector, trade unions, research institutions, academic institutions, and individuals in a single platform to plan, implement, and learn together. Because I think it is really at the center, it is really at the hub where we need to be intentional as a country to end GBV. I mean, we very much know what happened in around 2018 when there was a total shutdown, when women of South Africa were sick and tired of these high levels of GBV, which really led to the development of the NSP. So everyone really needs to come together around this topic, and we're intentional about it. And I think from there, that's when it will infiltrate all areas where GBV tends to thrive, most importantly in our schools, workplaces, and in our homes. We really need to keep on pushing. There is no quick fixes to this approach. It will take some time, because this patriarchal ideologies and way of living that most of us men have been brought up with, it really takes time before we understand that our actions and the way we view life, they are jeopardizing other people's freedom to live life of their choice.
Well, the general sentiment, I suppose, is that gender-based violence is only physical, yet it can take so many different forms. It could be sexual, it could be emotional, it could be financial, or even structural. So do you get a sense then that perpetrators are aware of these other forms, or they could be unleashing violence on their partners, oblivious that they are in fact committing gender-based violence?
You're very much correct. GBV takes on quite a number of forms, and I think, but what you get to hear in the public sphere is people think gender-based violence is only physical. So I stand to be corrected, but I think a lot of people are of the belief that GBV is only when you are raising your hand on your partner, on someone else on the basis of their gender. We don't really know some of the other ways through which we are inflicting GBV on others. And on that basis, we do not know that we're actually finding ourselves on the wrong side of fighting gender-based violence in this country and continent. So to answer your question, I don't think a lot of people know. And I think it is then our responsibility as the NSP, with you as the media, to utilize these platforms to educate people that gender-based violence really do take quite a number of forms and shape. And I think from that point, a lot of us, people that might unintentionally or not being aware that they're perpetrators, can start to check their steps in what they're doing. But I'm really quite happy with the conversations that we as a country have been having around GBV in the country. I mean, as a young man, I am, in most instances, finding myself in conversations with other young men. And we're really trying to have some of these conversations taking center stage in the conversations that we're having as young men around GBV. What is it? How can we stop it? How does this thing, affect our masculinity and all of those things? So we're really getting there in educating each other on what GBV is, what its implications are, and how is it that we jointly can prevent it.
Matsetsebale, thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate your time, and I suppose then that these kinds of conversation should also extend to the cultural nuances, because there's this culture, especially in the African setting, that there's this culture of submission, that a woman needs to submit. In our language, we call it ulbamba lishisa lipoto. So thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate your time and your insights on this matter. That was Matsetsebale Tleane, the director at Agape Youth Movement.